I was 15 the first time I drowned someone. It wasn't premeditated, not in the way people think when they hear the word. There was no drawn-out plan, no whispered threats, no anger. Just me, Jamie Carter, and the swamp. Jamie was my best friend. I think that's what unsettles people the most. He trusted me. We'd spent whole summers together, biking down dirt roads, picking at scabs on our knees, daring each other to jump off rusted bridges into the sluggish water. The swamp had always been ours. That afternoon, we were playing our usual game, seeing who could hold their breath the longest. Jamie always won. He had this way of staying completely still underwater, arms loose at his sides, legs drifting like he belonged there. I hated it. I hated the way he made it look easy. So when he went under that time, I waited. I let him settle, his body swaying with the current. Then I placed my hands on his shoulders and pushed. At first, it was part of the game. He struggled, kicked at my legs, but I held firm. I told myself I just wanted to win for once. I told myself he'd get free. But then the kicking slowed. His fingers clawed at my wrists, bubbles spilling in frantic bursts. And suddenly, I wasn't just playing anymore. I held him down until he stopped moving. I remember watching the swamp take him, watching the way the dark water swallowed his body whole, like he had never been there at all. It was quiet. So quiet. And then I climbed out, dried my hands on my jeans, and walked home. I thought I would feel something. Guilt, maybe. Horror. But all I felt was a sense of calm. I had done something irreversible, something final. And no one would ever know. Jamie's parents called the police that night when he didn't come home. I sat at my kitchen table, listening as my own mother whispered with the neighbors. "Jamie's missing," she said, hand over the phone receiver. "They think he went swimming. God, I hope it wasn't the swamp." I hoped so too. The search lasted a week. I went with them, dragging sticks through the mud, calling his name like I expected him to answer. But the swamp doesn't give back. It never has. And after a while, neither did I. I never stopped. That's the part no one understands. People always ask why, like there's some great revelation waiting behind the answer. But the truth is, I just kept going. Jamie was an accident. The next one wasn't. By the time I was 17, 3 more had joined him beneath the water. A girl from the next town over. A boy who had just moved in down the street. A kid whose parents had gone through a messy divorce, who spent too much time on his own. The police blamed the swamp. The current was strong, they said. Unpredictable. The kind of place that swallowed people whole. I didn't correct them. By the time I graduated, I knew how to pick the right ones. People no one would miss right away. People whose absence would be met with shrugs, not search parties. And the swamp always took them. That was the deal, I figured. I brought them, and it kept my secrets. For years, that's how it worked. Until it didn't. The first time I felt the swamp turn against me, I almost didn't notice. It was late September, the air thick with humidity, the kind of night where everything feels close. I had brought someone new, Mark, maybe Matt, some guy I met in a bar 2 towns over. He had the look I knew well, lonely, a little lost, drinking to forget something. Perfect. We walked to the edge of the swamp, past the places where the ground was still firm, where the reeds hadn't yet broken through the dirt. He followed me easily, trusting. They always did. I let him step into the water first. Watched as it lapped at his ankles, his knees. And then, when he turned to say something, I took hold of his shoulders and pushed. It should have been easy. It always was. But as I held him down, something shifted beneath my feet. The mud softened unnaturally fast, pulling at my boots like it had weight, like it had hands. A shudder ran through the water. Mark, Matt, whatever his name was, wasn't fighting anymore, but I was suddenly struggling to keep my own footing. The swamp was pulling at me too. I let go and staggered back, heart hammering. The water stilled immediately, as if it had been waiting for me to break. I stood there for a long time, staring at the rippling surface, at the place where his body should have been. But the swamp had already taken him. Just like it always did. So why did it feel different? I walked home that night with damp shoes and an unease I couldn't shake. It felt ridiculous to think it, stupid, even, but for the first time, I felt like the swamp had noticed me. Like it had let me do this for years without question, and now, for whatever reason, it was asking why. I tried to ignore it. For weeks, I told myself it was my imagination. I had gotten careless, that's all. The ground had been softer than usual, maybe I had stepped wrong. But then I saw Jamie. I was at the grocery store, picking up coffee and bread, when I spotted him in the next aisle over. Same blonde hair, same slouched posture. He was standing by the frozen food section, staring blankly at a row of stacked dinners. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. It couldn't be him. It wasn't him. Jamie had been gone for 20 years. I had watched him sink. But the resemblance was uncanny. I took a step closer, pretending to look at a display of cereal, but the moment I did, he turned. Our eyes met. And I swear to God, he smiled. I left my cart where it was and walked straight out of the store. That was just the beginning. It started happening everywhere. A girl I had drowned 6 summers ago sat in the corner of a diner, stirring coffee, her nails tapping absently against the rim of the mug. A man I had watched slip beneath the surface stood outside a gas station, staring at the cracked pavement like he was waiting for something. They never approached me. Never spoke. But they were there. They were everywhere. I told myself they were just coincidences. People with similar faces. My mind playing tricks on me. But I knew better. I had always known better. The swamp never gave anything back. And yet, somehow, they were back anyway. I stopped going to the swamp after that. Not out of guilt, I had never felt guilt. But something had changed, and I wasn't stupid enough to ignore it. For weeks, I stayed away, keeping to the edges of town, avoiding the grocery store, the gas station, the diner. But the faces kept appearing. They weren't just familiar anymore. They were watching me. At first, I only saw them from a distance, standing at street corners, waiting at bus stops, walking the quiet roads at night. Always there, always silent. Their skin was too pale, their movements just a little too stiff, like something adjusting to wearing human skin. Then, they got closer. One evening, I left work and found a man leaning against my car. His head was tilted downward, but I knew his face before he even looked up. He had been my second. Daniel something. A new kid at school back when I was 16. No friends, no family in town. He had followed me into the swamp just like Jamie had, trusting. I had drowned him, walked home, and never thought about him again. And yet, here he was. I stopped in my tracks, gripping my keys so tight they bit into my palm. Daniel lifted his head, his lips curling into a slow, unnatural smile. "Hey," he said. It was the first time any of them had spoken. I didn't answer. I turned around and walked back into the office building, straight to the restroom, and locked the door. My heart was hammering. I felt stupid for being shaken. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But when I finally worked up the nerve to leave, Daniel was gone. That night, I didn't sleep. A week passed. Then 2. I told myself I had imagined it. That Daniel had been a stranger who looked like him. That I was just seeing what I wanted to see. But deep down, I knew. So I did the only thing I could think of, I went back to the swamp. It was just past midnight when I reached the water's edge. The swamp was still, its surface dark and thick, reflecting the moonlight in warped, uneven ripples. I took a step forward, my boots sinking slightly into the mud. The air was thick, humid, clinging to my skin like something alive. I had spent my entire life here. I had owned this place. And now, for the first time, I felt unwelcome. "I know you're here," I said. The night swallowed my voice. I stepped closer to the water. My reflection wavered in the blackness, broken by the slow ripple of something moving beneath the surface. Then, the first hand broke through. A pale, bloated hand, fingers curled stiffly, rising from the water with a slow, deliberate motion. Then another. And another. They reached up, grasping at the air, pulling themselves forward. Faces followed. Daniel. Jamie. The girl from 6 summers ago. The man from the gas station. More, so many more. Their bodies didn't drip. The water clung to them, thick and viscous, sliding over their skin like they were still part of it. They didn't blink. Didn't breathe. They just stared. I stepped back. The mud sucked at my boots. "What do you want?" I whispered. None of them spoke. Then, slowly, they turned. One by one, they drifted back into the water, their empty eyes locked onto mine until the swamp swallowed them whole. And just like that, they were gone. The night was silent again. But I knew the message. The swamp had let me take from it for years. But now, it was done. Now, it wanted something back. It wanted me. I left the swamp that night, but it didn't leave me. I felt it everywhere. The pull. It started as a whisper in my bones, an unease sitting just beneath my skin. A heaviness, like I was moving through water even when my feet were on dry ground. The swamp was calling me back. At first, I ignored it. I locked my doors at night, kept the lights on, stayed away from town. But the faces followed. Not just in the streets anymore. Not just at the gas station or the diner. They were in my home. It started small, a wet footprint by the door. A faint smell of stagnant water in the hallway. My bathroom sink filled with something dark and thick, clogging the drain. Then, I woke up one night to find Daniel standing at the foot of my bed. His skin was wrong. Not rotting, not decayed, just off. Too smooth, too pale, like something trying to remember what a person was supposed to look like. His eyes, though. Those were the same. The same lifeless, black pit stare from the night I drowned him. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Daniel tilted his head, his lips stretching into that slow, unnatural smile. Then he spoke. "You need to come back." His voice wasn't human. Not anymore. It was thick, wet, layered, like multiple voices speaking at once. Like the swamp itself was speaking through him. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Daniel leaned closer. I could smell him, swamp water, earth, something deeper, something old. "We've been waiting," he said. And then he was gone. No movement. No retreating footsteps. Just gone, like he had never been there. But the wet footprints on my floor said otherwise. I stopped sleeping after that. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt them standing there, just beyond the dark. Watching. Waiting. I started seeing things in the mirror, faces behind me, shadows moving in water where there was none. My reflection lingering a second too long after I had turned away. The pull was getting stronger. I caught myself walking toward the swamp one night without remembering how I had left my house. I stood at the edge, barefoot, mud between my toes, the water lapping just inches from my feet. I wasn't afraid of it. That was the worst part. Some deep part of me wanted to step in. I wanted to let it take me. But I forced myself to turn back. For 3 days, I locked myself inside. I didn't eat. Didn't drink. I kept every light on, every door barred shut. But the swamp doesn't need open doors. It only needs time. And mine was running out. The final sign came the next night. I was sitting in my living room, staring at the walls, when I heard it. A sound I hadn't heard in over 20 years. Bubbles. Not loud. Not obvious. Just a faint, rhythmic bubbling, like air escaping from something deep beneath the surface. I knew that sound. I had caused that sound. It was the last thing I ever heard from the people I drowned. The last breath before the swamp swallowed them forever. The bubbling grew louder. Closer. I turned my head, and the breath caught in my throat. The walls were leaking. Thin streams of water seeped from the cracks in the plaster, thick and dark, moving too slowly to be natural. It pooled on the floor, crawling toward me in sluggish tendrils. The smell was overwhelming, wet earth, rot, the unmistakable scent of the swamp. Then I felt it. The floor wasn't solid anymore. I looked down, and my breath hitched. My feet were sinking. Not into the floor, into mud. The carpet, the wood beneath it, all of it was gone. Replaced with the dark, hungry sludge of the swamp. The pull was stronger than ever. I tried to move, but it gripped me tight, sucking me down inch by inch. I clawed at the walls, at the furniture, but my hands passed through them like mist. None of it was real anymore. The swamp had come for me. And this time, it wasn't letting go. I don't remember falling. One moment, my legs were sinking into the floor, the swamp pulling me down, thick and relentless. The next, I was standing at the water's edge. The real edge. The swamp stretched before me, still and endless. The air hung heavy, pressing into my lungs, thick as molasses. It was waiting. I turned to run, but there was nowhere to go. Behind me, the road was gone. My house was gone. The world I had known, the world I had lived in, was gone. There was only the swamp. And them. They stood at the waterline, just beyond the reeds. Jamie was in front, like he always had been. His blonde hair clung to his forehead, slick with water, his eyes sunken and empty. The others flanked him, Daniel, the girl from the diner, the man from the gas station. More of them. All of them. The ones I had drowned. The ones the swamp had kept. But now, they weren't beneath the surface anymore. They were here. Waiting for me. Jamie took a step forward, the water swirling around his ankles. He opened his mouth to speak, and his voice came in pieces, like the wind through broken reeds. You knew this would happen. I didn't respond. He was right. I had known, somewhere deep inside, that the swamp wouldn't let me take forever. That there would be a cost. That one day, it would take me too. Jamie stepped closer. His foot touched dry land, but it didn't make a sound. You belong here. I shook my head. No. Jamie tilted his head. You always did. The others were moving now, their feet dragging through the mud, slow and patient. They weren't attacking. They didn't need to. I could already feel it. The pull. It started in my chest, slow at first, then stronger, a force I couldn't see, couldn't fight. My breath caught in my throat. I took a step back. My heel hit the mud, but there was no resistance. No ground beneath me. I was sliding. The swamp didn't need to grab me. It didn't need to force me down. It had already won. Jamie smiled. I hadn't seen that smile in 20 years. Then the others smiled too. Wide, unnatural grins stretching too far across their faces. The mud reached my knees. My fingers shook. I tried to move, tried to fight it, but the swamp had already decided. The pull was relentless. It didn't hurt. That was the worst part. I had seen death so many times, had felt bodies struggle under my hands, had heard their final desperate gasps. I had always imagined my own end would be the same, clawing, panicked, desperate. But this was quiet. It was inevitable. I was waist deep now, the water thick and sluggish around my ribs. I tried to speak. To beg. To tell Jamie, tell all of them, that I was sorry. But I wasn't. And we all knew it. The water rose to my chest. Then my shoulders. Then my throat. I took one last breath, one final, shuddering gulp of air. And then the swamp swallowed me whole. Darkness. No sound. No light. Just the slow, pulsing rhythm of the water. I drifted. The pull was gone now. Because I was part of it. I tried to open my mouth, but my lips didn't move. My arms floated at my sides, weightless, lifeless. My body wasn't my own anymore. And somewhere in the silence, I felt them. The others. We weren't separate anymore. We were the swamp. We always had been. And now, we were waiting. Waiting for the next one to come. Waiting for the next body to sink. Waiting for the next breath to stop. Because the swamp never lets go. It only takes. And it never stops.